Why are some of the most powerful figures in the British media queuing up to buy this man's local paper? Still printing on technology from the last century.
It's, in my view, one of the best, if not the best, local weekly papers in Britain.
Why is this editor hoping the small screen will revive his flagging sales? And how is this man making a fortune buying up ailing papers across the south?
The motto by which we've survived is retaliate first.
How will local papers founded in the last century survive into the next? There was a time when newspapers had the information highway to themselves. If you wanted to know what was going on, it was the printed word that mattered. Nowadays, you don't have to go looking for information, you're bombarded with it.
You're listening to 5 Live on 909 and 6.
It's Sky News. Heart of the Sky Satellite.
CNN International plans live coverage of the Israeli-Palestinian.
This is Solon 96.1 FM from the BBC, first in the south.
Many local papers have seen their circulations halved. Yet this one appears to be bucking the trend. The Lymington Times, far from changing with the times, has chosen to fall behind them in the stories they tell and the way they print them. Under its editor Charles Curry, it still uses printing technology dating back to the Industrial Revolution.
Many newspapers that I've noticed have spent vast amounts of money in brand new machinery, when if they'd bothered they could have managed nearly as well with their old machinery. The readers buy the paper for what's in it, even if it's rather badly printed, and they're very forgiving, a lot of them, providing it's what they want to read.
Casting letters from molten metal to print stories of everyday life is a formula which has served the Curry family well. The paper was set up in the 1920s. Charles Curry joined a decade later and has been there ever since. As the sales of many other papers in the south have ebbed away, the Lymington Times has increased its circulation from 16,000 to over 20,000.
People are interested in other people. They're very fortunate with that. I mean, that keeps us in business. I think they want to be informed and they want to be entertained.
How would you describe your journalistic approach then, the journalistic approach of the Lymington Times?
Perhaps a little dull, but we like to think that we try and get a balanced picture.
Many people consider that weekly newspaper journalism is dull and uninteresting, but there's no reason why this should be so.
One of the reporters in the 60s was Keith Bloodworth.
Well, with a full day of rains yesterday, as you well know.
Yes. And how much actually subsided?
The whole path from the cliff top to the sand level here went down last night.
Yes, I see. Is it the sea coming in, or
good heavens,
rain?
no, it's the rains that come down. It comes down to the cliff face and slides down the cliff.
Did you have to swim, or did you have to waded?
I waded, and then a chap called Roger Matthews,
a community policeman about to receive a long service award, relives a moment from his career. Keith Bloodworth, still with the paper, has covered most of it.
So basically then, 22 years service, this rescue was the the highlight of
my career.
Your career. Okay then, Tony, have a nice day on Friday. All the best to Joy and the family. See you soon.
And you, Devil.
Okay, bye.
Cheers.
Keith did leave the paper for a time to join a competitor.
When I came back 6 years ago, my old Underwood typewriter was still in the same place where I'd left it 22 years earlier, under the desk, gathering dust. Very little has changed. We no longer have pigeons for sending messages. We've now, since then, progressed to word processors. That's the latest modern technology that we have. All, I might say, bought second-hand through our own paper at very modest prices.
It's 7 in the morning at the paper Keith Bloodworth worked on for his 22 years away from the Lymington Times. The Daily Echo's morning briefing is underway.
It's a good addition for the elderly today.
It is, yeah.
We've also got that one. It's 100.
Christ. Can we turn that into a graphic tease on one?
The editor is Pat Fleming, a former Fleet Street tabloid journalist.
Murder. Piano tease.
Since 1978, its circulation has plummeted from 100,000 to 61,000. It covers an urban sprawl around Southampton, Farnham and the New Forest, where it overlaps with the Lymington Times. But this tabloid daily is very different from its weekly neighbour.
What we seek to have to do is to actually appeal to roughly 500,000 people, potentially every night, living in 13 different council areas and 3 different county council areas, with different interests, different needs and different requirements. And what we also have to assume is a lot of people reading us don't read national newspapers.
Unlike the Lymington Times, this is a multi-million-pound publicly quoted business. At its heart, the advertising department.
Are you re-advertising?
3/4 of the paper's income is earned here. There are just as many people and just as much power as in the newsroom. In the newsroom, a new story is breaking.
Sounds like quite a good story. We've got a residents' petition in. Lots of people in Manor Road North are angry about the new wheelie bin trial. They're the first houses, basically, that have been asked to try them. They're angry, they live in terraced houses, they don't like the bins, they just want to go back to how it used to be. All right. Okay.
Annie Brown is covering an issue affecting 7,000 people. The Echo's aware of the interest in community stories like this.
Southern Daily Echo, you're obviously in the school and you've had to chat.
Like every daily paper in the region, it's competing for attention in the most competitive market of all.
We've put our bags out here for the last 30 years. We pay our rates. We've got to walk right down there.
The paper is head-to-head with 5 local radio stations and 2 regional television companies.
As though we've had enough. I have.
And there's the national media as well. The Daily Echo is attempting to emulate the content of the weeklies with community pullouts. But it's sensation that sells in this crowded media marketplace. It's all a striking contrast with their smaller neighbours.
The local journalist has to cover all stories which occur within his locality, some of which are interesting to him, others which are not.
The Lymington Times has sent out veteran reporter Keith Bloodworth, along with a new recruit.
You haven't met Miles before, have you? He's going to do the photograph.
A horse has been badly burnt in an arson attack on a barn. They've been following its recovery week by week.
Journalists, when they start out, have notoriously bad pay. We're paid about £6,000, which isn't very much, but we get the upkeep and maintenance of our cars paid for as part of that.
And I gather that,
Miles also has accommodation provided in a room above the paper.
I need to get closer.
That's the one we want.
The wages may be poor, but the training has been the foundation of many an illustrious career. This story has met with a mixed response in the forest. Some say the animals should be put down. Others have rung to donate money.
Hello, Milton Advertiser, Lymington Times.
Over the years, a combination of veterans and complete newcomers has helped the paper to build an unassailable position, reporting simply on everything.
Do you think of this as the actual cub hunt as sort of work rather than pleasure?
No, I think of it as my entertainment, really.
It's payment.
Entertainment.
Oh, entertainment.
No payment attached to it, I can assure you.
Sorry like that, that's right, that's good. Right, okay. Don't let my ex-wife see this.
The paper has created a niche as the official record of life in the forest. Among the hundreds of people attending an inquiry into a controversial gravel extraction proposal are two reporters. On the left from the Lymington Times, the other from the Echo's sister paper in Bournemouth. The very different amounts of time they're at the hearing tells its own story.
So you want to cover in this for 4 days, or just the whole 3 days? Are you? And you're here for 10 minutes. Well, for the opening.
How the golden couple in? Can I come in and have a quick chat about
Keith Bloodworth is covering a golden wedding.
I suppose I know most of the answers because we've known each other now for something over 40 years, but I've always known you as Skip.
Yeah.
Why Skip? Why have you got this nickname,
Well,
Skip?
my father was Skip at Milford.
They rely on the new Milton Advertiser for the truth and nothing but the truth. No jazzing up or flowering of stories. To them, we are the Bible in the New Forest.
Keith's story joins others being typeset by hand. The stone hands, as they're known, assemble painstakingly the paper line by line.
This is what's left. Sworn take over judicial review. Anti-Hunt protester says he was headbutted.
Well, they'll have that in, yeah.
Steam Rally founder dies.
Yes.
Sentence adjourned on forgery offences.
Well, that's a hole.
Highcliffe woman died at wheel.
That'll hold.
Drunk broke into car.
That'll hold.
Woman for trial on forged pesetas charge.
When's the trial is coming up? The daily papers have to hot the stories up, as it were, I think that's the term used, and try and create the interest. They're not doing the trivia, which you might consider trivia, which we would do. There's no police court cases. Practically no police court case here at all, and no networking is going to report council meetings. Far too dull. Takes far too much space. I don't know in some papers the rule that no story longer than 5 or 6 paragraphs will be allowed. That keeps the paper typographically neat, but editorially poor.
The Lymington Times has no shareholders to answer to or dividends to pay.
Yes, yes.
I've been asked to go back to the gravel inquiry.
Yes.
Charles Curry, the sole proprietor, is free to run it his way.
So I'm doing a note on it, regretting the potential loss of these 150 jobs.
Okay.
As at the Daily Echo, the advertising staff bring in most of the income.
Good morning, Advertiser Times.
But editorial content and not cash remains king here. The atmosphere is like that of a corner shop.
OK, Jackie, well, we'll probably be get in contact with you in the next week or so.
If you're thinking of next week...
It may look quaint, but this is a business so successful it doesn't need to canvass for customers.
Yes. I may not be there Thursday because...
I'm not going to be there Thursday.
Oh, won't you?
No.
I've got a bill to pay for a start.
We haven't got the tin back yet.
Such is the demand that every week the paper is forced to turn away advertising.
OK, if I could start off by taking your telephone number there, please.
That's right. At the Daily Echo, a highly sophisticated hard sell is going on. As the circulation of the flagship paper has fallen, the advertising department has looked for new outlets to keep profits up. They've risen again this year.
OK, I'll just quickly double-check that back with you. That'll be a total of £22.50 plus VAT for you.
What was a single newspaper has become a group with close to 80 titles. Just 3 are dailies.
Basically, they've got to get bins up steps and right through the houses and then dump them in the front garden. The main thing is that
rubbish in
the petition is the big thing at the moment.
The Daily Echo's response to declining sales has been one of managed retreat. Coverage of Southampton has remained strong, but the paper has pulled out of many areas, closing offices from New Milton to Basingstoke. Its place is being filled by the group's weeklies and free sheets, each one a vehicle for advertising. To the Daily Echo's editor, Pat Fleming, the Lymington Times is a profitable piece of the jigsaw which continues to elude him.
The New Milton Advertiser and Lymington Times is a wonderful paper. It isn't owned by us, but there is absolutely no doubt in our mind that we would be very interested in it if it came up for sale.
At the Lymington Times, last week's news makes way for this week's. They're melting down the old printing plates in a well-rehearsed routine which is played out around the paper.
Mr. Martin Weston, 37 years old father of 4 children of 5 Manor Road near Milton, arrived at Keyhaven Thursday night.
Candy, the pony badly burned in a farm arson attack, as the result of which 2 others died, has returned home from a veterinary hospital at Liphook, where for several weeks she was in intensive care stop. To date, Paula's bill has amassed to more than £3,000 per annum. So far, she has raised £1,000, including £600 from compassionate and kind-hearted A&T readers' stock.
But is the Lymington Times an eccentric exception to the decline of a smokestack industry? Will traditional weeklies inevitably go the way of the dailies? In Farnham, Surrey, Sir Ray Tindle says not so. He's made a fortune from parish pump news. It's his abiding passion, along with vintage cars. In the cut and thrust of newspaper takeovers, he damaged his vocal cords, he says, in a shouting match with Robert Maxwell. His philosophy is small is beautiful.
We don't actually put in which cat had kittens, but if I could, I would. If you give the people of Farnham what they can't get in any other way, they will buy the paper.
And buy them they do. Over 1 million copies of his 80 titles. They made him nearly £3 million last year.
Of course, I turn to the Farnham Herald first. See how many faces we've got in that. Sure, with those runners there. And how about that? Those were all the children who started school this week in the area. See all the faces. They'll be our friends for life.
There's no doubting the attachment to the values of traditional journalism here, but not to the methods of producing it. In the old print room, hot metal has been displaced by the microchip. 14 titles are compiled here and printed in a purpose-built centre on a nearby industrial estate. The empire is still growing. This summer, Sir Ray Tindle bought the Alton Gazette to add to the Alton Times. Now he and his chief executive are discussing another takeover.
It would complement our existing papers in that area quite nicely and fill a gap in the geographical area.
And you say he's well in his 90s now?
He must be at least 92 now.
It's a very old paper, and if they really are in trouble, there isn't any reason why we shouldn't buy it.
Sir Ray Tindle is yet another of those who's had his eye on the Lymington Times.
I'd love to own it, but it isn't for sale. It's a very good example of a paper that keeps down to earth and has been run very well indeed by the Curry family for years. I'm sure it isn't for sale. If it were, I would love to have it, but then so would a lot of other people.
Right. Yeah, thanks. We could hold the computer viruses if we were going to be a bit tight.
2 hours till the presses roll, and they're casting the printing plates. An impression of the page is placed in a mould, ready for the molten metal.
Charles has just given you this. It's the murder of the solicitor. Is there any room on the front for it? Paragraph.
Photographs, adverts and late stories are coming together in the last few pages. A metal etching has been made of the picture of the injured horse. It's an uncertain process. Staff have likened some of the results to the Turin shroud. The Daily Echo has gone for another eye-catching lead.
That's fine. I don't know if that could be brought down just a turn.
Annie Brown's wheelie bin story is tucked in below. The paper's move to a more tabloid style has succeeded only in slowing the decline in readership. More radical thinking is needed. They've gone in search of it beyond the printed page. Last month, the Daily Echo took its first tentative steps onto the information superhighway, guided by computer experts at the University of Southampton.
I mean, obviously, this is one of our strongest campaigns that we've had in actually fighting for the new Dell site.
Right.
Being able to actually show that to people around the country and actually being able to transport the image and allow people to come online and actually see what's going on is the way of the future for us, really. What we see through this link is that we're opening a route, opening a door for people to travel into a large room, rather like travelling into a library in their home that is the newspaper. And they will call upon us through their telephone or through their computer for all sorts of information.
Yes, for example, accommodation.
Yeah, so if we...
Bed and breakfast.
Let's look at bed and breakfast in New York.
This is a list of the various bed and breakfast.
Right. This is what I'm looking to do. I mean, for New York, if you like, here read Southampton.
Yeah.
And people who are coming to Southampton could actually access the newspaper's databases and again look through the hotel accommodation, the restaurant accommodation.
Ultimately, Pat Fleming believes the technology will enable him to take on local rivals in their own backyard.
What we're trying to do is to say to people who may read the Southern Daily Echo that all the information broadly that is available to the New Milton Advertiser and Lymington Times is available to our newspaper every day. Well, a newspaper like ours really has to be the agent that actually provides that information on an ongoing basis. If you want to find, you know, which dentist is actually available for NHS patients in the future, where do you go? Well, we want people to say, we must go to the Daily Echo, they will know. And we want them to buy the newspaper 6 days a week to be sure that that gives them access, if you like, rather like a loyalty card or a credit card into the newspaper to, at any point, day or night, to get information that is valuable to them.
Good evening and welcome. This winter has already seen an alarming...
Their search for salvation hasn't stopped there.
This year, deaths in the Solent Coast Guard district have doubled. Annie Brown reports.
This year, there have already been 1,142
Newsroom journalists have taken part in a pilot of a service they one day hope to sell to television. Southern Newspapers is already negotiating with cable companies. Sir David English is among those the Echo is talking to. One of the most powerful figures in the British media, he controls a growing empire, from the Daily Mail and Mail on Sunday to a string of television and radio companies. His latest venture is Channel 1, a London cable television station, soon to expand beyond the capital.
The evening papers in decline, they're fighting for their lives. They've done very well for so many of them to survive. They're doing what all newspapers are doing, trying to put a foot into electronic media to see where it's going. I mean, I don't think that's going to affect them economically in any way in the immediate future. It will neither harm them nor damage them. But my own view is there's no substitution for local news.
Sir David English lives in the New Forest and began his career at the sister paper of the Daily Echo in Bournemouth. His local paper is the Lymington Times.
If I had to choose between buying the Bournemouth Echo, the Southern Echo, or the Lymington Times, living in this part of the world, I mean, I could only buy one. I'd buy the Lymington Times, and I think a lot of people would do that too. I go back a long way. I was on a rival paper to the Lymington Times, and I was a rival reporter to Charles Curry. And we often talk about it, that I went off to London and then all around the world, and he chose voluntarily to stay here. He loved this paper, he loved this journalism. That paper is a real professional labour of love. I did try to buy it at one time, and it was a terribly good paper in those days. It hasn't changed very much. It's still a terribly good paper.
The front page is now complete, the press ready to roll. This is one of the last occasions on which this ancient process will be used. As the 21st century approaches, even the Lymington paper is having to move with the times, just a little. The paper's moving over to a new building and a newer press they've acquired and assembled themselves. 30 years old, it cost £10,000 as scrap. It will allow them to produce more pages and thus stop turning away advertising. Test runs are sharper and don't smudge. Other than that, the paper's almost exactly the same. The old machine has produced the very last edition of a British paper printed on a hot metal press. It's destined for a museum. It'll be a year before the Daily Echo moves into its new headquarters, a £35 million expression of confidence in their multimedia vision of the future.
I don't think you'll ever see the Southern Daily Echo in the short term account in the traditional way to the level of sales it had in the 60s. But we know that in the future you may well have a readership that is exactly the same number of the 60s, taking information from the newspaper, but in many different ways.
For the newspaper, you can pick it up or you can put it down. You can look to what you want. You get it right away. No computer is going to give you the stuff on the screen as fast as you can go to page 5 of your paper and look at it.
So far, the figures are stacking up in Charles Curry's favour. 95% of customers at this newsagent take the Lymington Times. For editors searching for a role in the 21st century, it's a message that's difficult to ignore.
Homely paper in a way. I can look through the births, marriages and deaths and know somebody invariably in there.
Well, I think it's an excellent paper myself. I like it very much.
Maybe a bit nosy and seeing what my neighbours are doing or something like that. It's just a good paper. It's as simple as that.
Well, I've been reading it now for the last 20 years, I expect, and I wouldn't miss it.
Six-month-old vixen Cherry will be amongst those grateful for the 10-year planning rule. She's joined mum Bracken and her two cubs, Fern and Digby.
I love the story of Cherry, the vixen, too. That's a very good story.
The need for drivers to use door safety locks was never more amply evidenced than in an accident witnessed by A&T reporter Brian Down on Tuesday.
He is another guy that is terrifically enthusiastic. And he really does drive everything that moves.
Saab loses caps.
I just find that absolutely fascinating. I don't know why, but it just intrigues me.
A Saab car parked in Churchill, Milford-on-Sea, had its 4 hubcaps stolen on Thursday last week.
And in a funny way, things like that might actually turn into national stories if you found the great hubcap.